Hey, Mr. Crandall here. I don't know why you have to do history on the computer today. For some reason, one of us is out of the classroom. Hopefully, you're not homesick. Hopefully, I'm not homesick. But for some reason, this is how we're going to have to do it today. One thing I'd like you to do is take really good notes because there will be quizzes embedded throughout this video. So please make sure you take great notes and enjoy the video and get lots out of it. All right, let's get started. One of the important topics that we're going to have to look at this unit on globalization is world population growth. So before we start, let's just take a look at some background information. One of the things I want you to do is take a look at the current world population growth. So if you would, click on this link right here, and it should take you to the United States Census Bureau World Population Clock. It also shows you the US population at this time as well. So just check it out, check around the site a little bit. All right, once you've had some time investigating that website, I've got a challenge for you. Check out the world population counter, not the US, but the world. And here's the challenge. You're gonna have to do some math today. Figure out how many more people there will be on Earth by this time next week. While you're sitting in this class next week, how many more people will there be on Earth? Approximate, of course. Now, growth rate is not just about how many kids are being born. Remember, people die too. So growth rate is how many children are being born minus how many people die, plus or minus how many people migrate in or out of a country. When we're talking about world population, you really don't have to worry about migration rate unless you're worried about aliens migrating in or people leaving Earth. So after you check the counter, go ahead and try to figure out the issue. How many more people will there be on Earth by the time you're in this class next week? If you haven't figured it out already, you probably should have paused the video while you did that challenge. Well, kudos to any of you who did not use a calculator on this. But if you did some estimation and figured about 30 people every 10 seconds or so are added to the Earth's population, you probably would have come close to somewhere around 2 million more people by this time next week. That's 2 million more mouths to feed, 2 million more people that need fresh water, etc. So is population growth an issue? Check out this graph on world population growth from 1750 to 2100. Now, remember, when you look at graphs, always tend to look for trends or changes. And so you can definitely see some trends, especially starting in the 1900s as far as population growth goes. But I do also want you to notice something. The population growth rate peaked at about 2.1% sometime in the 1960s or 70s, and actually has been declining since. We'll talk about that later. So if the Earth's population is growing that quickly, should you be concerned? Well, maybe, maybe not. We should look at some key questions to help us answer whether or not the Earth's population growth is a problem or not. First, why is the Earth's population growing? Could it be a problem? What are the consequences of population growth? And finally, what are some possible strategies and solutions to population growth? All right, next challenge for you. You may work with your desk neighbor on this one. Analyze this map. What does it tell you? What do countries with high growth rates have in common? What about countries with low growth rates? Just pause the video and take a couple minutes to decipher and analyze this map. Did you get it? Hopefully you figured out that wealthier, more industrialized nations have much lower growth rates, while poor developing countries have the highest growth rates. This is very helpful for helping us understand population growth. Population growth rates higher in poorer countries. Usually, this is when someone states the obvious. They have more babies. Yes, we all get that. But the question is, why do they have more babies? Many of you plan on going to college after this, and I believe most or all of you plan on getting a job, unless you are planning on marrying for money or planning on living off the grid. But what will you do when you get too old to work? In the United States, it's not too difficult. You either save for and have savings when you retire, and the government also tends to give support in the form of Social Security payments. Yes, the government sends a check every month to people age 65 and older. But what about poor countries where these population growth rates are high? Many people in these countries are subsistence farmers. Do you think they have enough money saved up? Most likely not. Subsistence farmers make very little income. And these poor countries don't typically have governments that tend to take care of the elderly. So if you are poor in one of these poor countries and you're a farmer, what's going to happen when you get too old to work? Guess what? One of the things in a lot of these countries is that they have kids as their form of Social Security. They have kids so they can get help on the farm. And when they get too old to work, they can be taken care of by their kids. So when death rates were very high in the past, people in these countries needed to have a lot of kids in order to make sure at least one or two of them survived. And so they were taken care of when they're old. But now that death rates have decreased dramatically, people in these countries need to realize that they do not have to have as many kids. The other reason, besides them just having more kids, it's because it's a form of Social Security. Secondly, they also need to be educated on things like birth control and family planning. Now, there are some countries where birth control might be against their religious beliefs, and so some countries this might not work for. A third reason, or a third issue, is cultural expectations. Okay, if you're a 15-year-old girl in the United States, what are you doing today? For most 15-year-old teenagers in the United States, you're going to school. What are you going to do next year? School? How about when you graduate? Most people would probably say college. How about after that? So here's the question. For American girls and most girls in industrialized countries, when do you think the average American girl plans on actually starting a family and having children? Take a guess. For most of my classes, the girls usually say somewhere between 25 and 28 years old. Now, I know there's exceptions. I know there's a show called 16 and Pregnant, but those are exceptions. That's not the average. So if that's the case for most developed countries, that women aren't planning on having kids until, at least age 25, that makes a difference. In most poor countries, especially where subsistence farming is common, a lot of girls don't go to school until for very long. And so they pretty much know everything that they are going to have to know by age 15, 16 or so. How to farm, how to cook, how to clean, etc. So when you're 15 years old, what's left? It's like you've graduated from college. And so a lot of them will then get married at age 16, 17, 18, instead of at age 24, 25. That makes a difference. 8 more years where you could potentially have kids. And so that makes a difference as well. There are also religious and cultural expectations in some countries. Like in many Middle Eastern countries, women do not have much of a say in the household or likely in family planning. It's the female's role to stay home and have children. Another problem or another issue is lack of access to birth control. All right, a second reason for high population growth rates is because death rates have declined at a faster rate than birth rates. Modern medicine and technology means that more kids can survive infancy and then become adults who can have children. Just as important has been innovations in food production. Genetic engineering and modern technology breakthroughs have allowed farmers to produce much more with the same amount of land as 100 years ago. When people have a better food supply and safe water to drink, they tend to survive longer, and therefore they also tend to have more children. So, what's the problem? Does it matter to you if there are more people on Earth? First of all, it is not a lack of room or physical space. Okay, another challenge for you. Take about 2 minutes to do this. Could everyone in the world fit in the state of Michigan? All right, and for all of those who'd like to have challenges to my questions, yes, they're all have at least standing room, and no, we are not counting people in buildings or on each other's shoulders or anything else you can think of to mess with this challenge. You can use Google on this one, and you probably have to. You have 3 minutes to do this. Go. Hopefully you figured out the answer on that one, or at least could figure out how to get the answer. And yes, everyone can easily fit in the state of Michigan. So here's the thing. If it's not a lack of room, what's the problem? It's resources, especially food and fresh water. The earth has a very limited amount of topsoil, and we are losing topsoil every year. Arable land is land that can be farmed. If people need food, we need farmland. And farmland every year is being lost to growing cities, deforestation, pollution, erosion, and extreme weather. Another issue is that there needs to be access to fresh water. Access to fresh water is still a problem in many parts of the world, especially areas where growth rates are high. This slide shows where fresh water is difficult to access. Notice that many of the areas where population growth is the highest are also the areas with the least access to safe drinking water. Minerals and fossil fuels help sustain current lifestyles, especially for those of us in developed, industrialized countries. Another issue is the problem of pollution. The more humans, the more pollution as well. Again, industrialized countries tend to pollute the most, but as developing countries like China and India become more industrialized, the pollution is increasing tremendously. Many Chinese cities have extremely poor air quality. I have a cousin that lived in China for a while, and she said one of the things Americans would be most shocked at is how poor the air is. So air pollution is one issue. Another would be land pollution, landfills, junkyards, chemical waste areas that tend to pollute the land. And finally, the pollution of freshwater resources as well. We even have problems in Michigan. If you recall, there was a spill in the Kalamazoo River a few years ago by Enbridge Oil that ended up leaking millions of gallons of oil into the Kalamazoo River and took years to clean up. Now, some people would say that population growth is not an issue. We will continue to innovate and invent better ways to live on this planet, or maybe we'll actually just start moving to Mars as well, and that this issue is exaggerated. Most, however, though, would say that humans need to continue to do more to ease the population issue. So, what are some strategies and solutions? Number one, obviously, try to decrease the population growth rate by lowering the fertility rate, especially in developing countries. First of all, what's the fertility rate? The fertility rate is the average number of births for a woman in a given place. So in some poor countries, by the way, this growth rate, or the fertility rate, I should say, is as high as 6. The average fertility rate right now in the world, according to CI World Factbook, is around 2.5. If we wanted the world's population to stop growing and remain steady, what would the fertility rate need to be? You may use your neighbor for help on this one. Take 1 minute. All right, hopefully you came up with something around 2. The correct answer is actually 2.1. So why? Why 2.1? Well, assuming that boys and girls are born at about equal rates, it's not exact, but about equally. And by the way, guys, girls are the ones that matter here since you can't give birth. Then each girl can have about 2 kids, one to replace her when she eventually dies, and one to replace the father. So where does the 0.1 come from? Well, some girls will die before they reach childbearing age, and so there can be a few extra children born to make up for that death rate. So I want you to remember the number 2.1. So if we're trying to reduce the fertility rate, how do you reduce the number of babies being born? Well, some governments, like China, have actually put restrictions on the number of children a couple can have. It used to be that they had a one-child policy, meaning if you had more than one child, that the government would not pay for education or healthcare or anything like that. You'd have to take care of them yourself. Remember, China's a communist country, and so that's how they worked it in that country. So you could have had more than one kid, but it would have been very expensive for you to do so. Well, they recently rescinded that policy, by the way, because, of course, there's quite a few problems with only allowing couples to have one child. But it did dramatically decrease their growth rate. It would be highly controversial, and a lot of countries definitely wouldn't go there. So another option would be government programs to support the elderly. Remember, if people feel like they'll be taken care of by the government when they're older, then they're probably less likely to have as many children, especially in some of these developing countries. Another strategy would be to improve the status of women. If women can vote, if women can stay in school longer, have careers, they would be more likely to wait before starting families. The more industrialized and modern economy is, the lower the growth rate tends to be, because in these industrialized countries, women tend to wait longer to have families. And finally, another thing countries need to do would be to give their people better access to education and birth control. Now, some of these things have been happening. If you remember the graph from the third slide, the population growth actually peaked in the 1970s and has been declining ever since. This decline is also why many people are not as worried about population growth as much anymore. Another option is to develop new resources to support higher populations. Could we, for instance, farm the oceans better? Will there be new advances in farming, like hydroponics, that allow for more food with less resources being used? Can we find better ways to use renewable resources, like energy from the sun, wind, or geothermal energy, so we do not rely on fossil fuels? Can synthetic materials replace minerals? These are all questions that scientists strive to find on a daily basis. A final thing that humans can do is work to save the resources we already have. Easy, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Question for you: why are they in this order? Reduce is the best, then reuse, and then recycle. Another thing is eat less meat. This would actually help save some of the precious topsoil. I know some of you could eat steak or bacon for every meal, but raising livestock actually takes up more precious topsoil than farming does. If you remember the energy pyramid from science, you lose about 90% of the available energy when you eat meat instead of eating plants. All right, well, hopefully you got a lot out of this PowerPoint and you'll be ready for those quizzes. Oh man, I just put myself in place of the cow. See ya.